Thank you for joining. Please comment, share, and subscribe. The Massacre of Tranent was a tragic event that occurred on the 21st of September, 1797, in the small Scottish town of Tranent. The massacre, which saw a group of weavers and miners clash with government forces, resulted in the deaths of at least 12 people and the injury of many more. The events leading up to the massacre were a product of the political and economic upheaval of the time, as well as the tensions between the working classes and those in power. At the heart of the conflict was the plight of the weavers and miners of Tranent, who were struggling to make a living wage in the face of rising unemployment and low wages. The weavers, in particular, had been hit hard by the introduction of new textile machinery, which had led to a sharp decline in demand for their hand-woven cloth. Many of the weavers had been forced to turn to mining as a means of supporting their families, but even this had become an uncertain source of income as the coal industry suffered a downturn. Faced with these challenges, the weavers and miners of Tranent had formed a radical political group, known as the Society of Friends of the People, which sought to address the economic and social issues facing the working classes. The group was inspired by the ideas of the French Revolution and the principles of democracy, equality, and freedom. However, the authorities viewed the Society of Friends of the People as a dangerous threat to the established order, and they were determined to suppress it. The government had passed a series of repressive measures, including the so-called gagging acts, which aimed to silence political dissent and prevent the spread of radical ideas. Tensions between the authorities and the Society of Friends of the People came to a head in September 1797, when a group of weavers and miners held a protest march through the streets of Tranent. The march was intended to draw attention to the desperate economic conditions in the town and to demand that the government take action to address them. However, the authorities viewed the march as an act of sedition, and they dispatched a force of soldiers and militia to disperse the crowd. The soldiers, armed with muskets and bayonets, confronted the protesters in the town square, where a violent confrontation ensued. Eyewitness accounts of the massacre vary, but most agree that the soldiers fired upon the protesters without warning or provocation. Some of the protesters fought back with improvised weapons, such as stones and sticks, but they were quickly overpowered by the well-armed soldiers. The violence continued throughout the day, as the soldiers pursued the protesters through the streets of Tranent. Many of the protesters sought refuge in their homes or in nearby fields, but the soldiers showed no mercy, indiscriminately firing upon anyone they encountered. In the aftermath of the massacre, the authorities arrested and imprisoned a number of the leaders of the Society of Friends of the People. They also conducted a brutal crackdown on political dissent, with many more activists and sympathizers being arrested, tried, and sentenced to harsh penalties. The Massacre of Tranent was a tragic event that highlighted the deep-seated divisions between the working classes and the ruling elite in 18th-century Scotland. It was also a brutal reminder of the lengths to which those in power were willing to go to maintain their control over society. Today, the Massacre of Tranent is commemorated by a memorial in the town's St. Martin's churchyard, which bears the names of those who lost their lives in the conflict. The memorial serves as a poignant reminder of the sacrifices made by the working classes in their struggle for economic and social justice. The Massacre of Tranent was met with shock and outrage throughout Scotland, with many calling for an investigation into the actions of the soldiers and the authorities. The incident also sparked renewed interest in the ideas of democracy, equality, and social justice, with many seeing the massacre as a stark illustration of the need for political reform. One of the most vocal critics of the government's handling of the Tranent incident was William Cobbett, a radical journalist and political activist. Cobbett had been a strong supporter of the Society of Friends of the People and had been a vocal critic of the government's repressive measures. In the aftermath of the massacre, Cobbett launched a scathing attack on the government in his newspaper, The Political Register. He argued that the massacre was a direct result of the government's failure to address the economic and social issues facing the working classes, and that the authorities had used violence as a means of suppressing legitimate dissent. Cobbett's criticisms struck a chord with many people, and his newspaper became an influential voice in the campaign for political reform. He was also instrumental in the establishment of the first parliamentary inquiry into the Tranent incident, which helped to expose the scale of the government's brutality. The Tranent incident also had a profound impact on the wider political landscape of Scotland, helping to pave the way for the growth of the radical movement and the eventual emergence of the Scottish Labour Party. The massacre served as a catalyst for political activism and social change, inspiring a new generation of reformers to fight for a fairer, more democratic society. Today, the legacy of the Massacre of Tranent lives on, both in the physical memorials that commemorate the victims of the conflict, and in the ongoing struggle for political and social justice. The tragedy of Tranent serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of political reform and the need for a society that is built on the principles of democracy, equality, and freedom. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.